Welcome on New Year's Eve 2024. Last few hours before 2025. Isn't that amazing? We're almost at 2025. Hard to believe. Time just flies when you're having so much fun. But thought I would just talk about the two biggest series on this channel. The Roman series and the Greek series. Now the Greek series, we finally have reached a... Oh, and by the way, I'm just talking here, and this isn't any... don't have any plan or anything. I'm just sort of talking on some thoughts I have about Alexander and some thoughts about Rome, but this isn't a planned lecture or anything. I think you guys know I do this once in a while, so if you hear some umming and some hawing, it's just because I'm sort of pulling stuff off the top of my head, which I feel like I want to talk about. But yeah, so we're at Alexander. It's hard to believe 11 years ago, I started this channel in 2013. It was in December. I can remember it. And I posted a video on Mycenaean Greece. I think that was the first video that I ever posted. I think it was the first one. And actually, it wasn't expected to be a huge series at that point. I was just going to post some random videos on Greece, some stuff. And it was so successful that I said, well, let's keep this thing going. Maybe we'll go farther. And here we are today, finally reach a part of history, Greek history, which is one of my favorite. It's definitely up there. I like the Persian Wars. I'd say that's probably my most favorite, but Alexander is a very close second. And I love this part of Greek history, and I'm glad I'm finally here. We finally made it. There's a lot of videos and a lot of recording, a lot of editing, but I finally made it. I guess just going to give some thoughts off the top of my head about Alexander. Now, somebody posted an interesting question, and that was, it is something that is very interesting. Would Philip have conquered the same amount of territory that Alexander did? Of course, we now know through Alexander's massive project what he did. I mean, it was an empire that stretched all the way from Greece all the way to India, which was a very long way. It's like 3,500 miles or something. I mean, that's a long way. Think about that. 3,500 miles. That's farther than it is from, if you live in America, it's farther from it is from New York to Los Angeles. That's just a long ways. In the 19th and 20th century, they could move supplies with trains and then airplanes. They could do airdrops. I mean, so he has to just sort of live off the land with his army foraging. And a lot of this was through deserts. Some of these deserts were uncharted. I mean, it was simply amazing what he was able to accomplish. But he had an army that was very, very loyal and was literally, in those days, literally willing to walk to the end of the earth with him. That's how loyal they were. Very loyal. I mean, we hear a lot about Macedonian treachery, but this army was very, very loyal to Alexander. And so, it was just an amazing, just the length to me always stands out. The amount of land in square miles that he conquered, that always stands out. Another thing that, I don't know, I mean, obviously we know Alexander is one of the greatest military commanders of all time. There's one story that sticks out to me from Plutarch, and it's an interesting story, where his father was, now this was when Alexander was like 14 or 15 years old. And this is when Persia was still on a good standing with Philip, so they sent some ambassadors, and they were impressed by Alexander's questions. He didn't bother them with all this small talk, all this, or even act like a kid. He wanted to know about the king, the character of the Persian king. He wanted to know about the nature of the road that they traveled. He asked very interesting questions. So even at a young age, these guys could tell that he's different. He's different. It's not just this normal kid. There's something different about him. Now, of course, the fact that he died so young with so much achieved is what really stands out in history. I think that's why he comes down through the ages with this larger than life persona. I think that's one of the things that really stands out, is that he just accomplished so much and died at a very, very young age. I do not think he was assassinated, and I know that makes for good gossip, but I just think he suffered so many different injuries because he really was sort of the last of a line of the tradition of Greek kings to lead in battle. It wasn't just Alexander, Epaminondas. Greek generals led the charge, literally. When he gets off at the Hellespont, he's the first to jump off the ship. In his armor, he didn't mind standing out. I think that's another thing that really is interesting to me. Alexander was not, you hear, I've read before where generals sometimes took off their stripes and their general tags because they didn't want to get shot, because That's the way it works. Shoot the general. That's what they try to do. Alexander, no, he wore his armor with pride and didn't mind standing out. And I think that part of that is because he really did believe that he was blessed by the gods. I mean, if you read Arian, and I hope you do, everywhere he goes, he's doing sacrifices. He's visiting temples. He's paying homage to Greek heroes, gods. He's dedicating new temples to Zeus, all these different gods. So he was very religious, and I think even more religious than Hannibal. I really do. I think he was very, very religious and believed that, I'm Alexander the Great, and I can just do what I want because the gods are behind me. I mean, certainly ancient historians and modern historians looked at some of his activities as reckless, but I think there was something behind that he believed he was divine. He had sort of a divine nature. And also I think that, it wasn't quite, I think things were much more planned out than it looks. So for instance, when he comes up to the river Granicus, and of course he has this interesting discussion with Parmenio, who was his top general. And now, of course, Parmenio says, "Hey, let's camp here." And it was a logical suggestion. Our army just marched all the way up here. The Persians are right across the river. Maybe we should, sort of settle for the night. But Alexander didn't do that. He ignored the advice and actually did something that completely violated the rules of warfare. He sends across a body of his cavalry across a river that was muddy. I mean, it made no sense. But in the end, it made a lot of sense because he was breaking up the Persian lines by doing that. It was all part of his plan, and then he was going to follow right behind. But certainly there's that element that he's doing things. I think things are a little bit more planned than what gets. I mean, some of these people have said that they think that he was, sort of reckless. And although it looks like it's reckless, I don't think it was quite as reckless as it stands out. In terms of Philip, now here's the interesting part. I think Alexander was following Philip's plan in Asia Minor. I really do. I think he was following his plan. And here's what he did. He went and took Sardis first, which was right in the sort of on the western side of Asia Minor. We're going to talk all about it, but it's sort of it's like a three-walled city in ancient times. It was a tremendously easy city to defend. And if the Persians had made some sort of concerted effort to do that, they could have tied Alexander up there for a while, but they didn't. And we'll get to that. But it was a stronghold right in the middle of Asia Minor. Very important. If you're going to hold Asia Minor in those days, you needed to have Sardis, which was the capital of the original Lydian Empire, which was taken over by. And by the way, that's one of the things Alexander's doing when he's going to these places. He knew, he was, I think, really, he was the one that really tried to get intelligence. There wasn't anything he didn't know about. And certainly he knew that the Lydians still practiced sort of their old cultural beliefs, and he was using that against the Persians. You have to remember the Persian Empire, it was sort of like Russia today. It had a lot of different cultures that they had incorporated through Cyrus the Great. And he did that too, by the way. He was very, he was very, in some respects, he was very easy on the population. By this point, they were sort of sick of the Persians. The satraps had become pretty corrupt. And so there was sort of a lot of discontent, at least in that area. So, of course, Alexander's capitalizing off of that. And so he resists the temptation to plunder some of these cities, even though he had, he really needed money. There was a lot of debt. The Macedonians had acquired a lot of debt. Now, Philip, before Alexander, was taking a lot of steps to set up the economy and get an economy going, but that takes time. And certainly he was trying to do that in Thracia with mines, and he was trying to set up an economy. But really, Alexander, when he went to, and this is another point that's simply amazing. You talk about, in many respects, it reminds me a little bit of Caesar. When Caesar crosses the Rubicon, he knows there's no going back. He knows that's it. Once you pass that Rubicon, there's no going back from that. And I think that was, Alexander had that same thing in mind. He gave away all of his possessions before he went to Persia. He gave it all away. Because he knew once he crossed the Hellespont, that was it. He wasn't coming back. That was going to be his career, was going to be defined in Asia Minor and further east. And it certainly was. But I got off track again, so now I'll stay on track. So I guess the question is, was Philip going to conquer everything that Alexander did? And I don't think so. So I think, like I said, I think Alexander was following his father's plan in Asia Minor. The size of the army that Philip left behind, the force that he was planning, was about 30,000, somewhere around there. So obviously he was planning something very big with the Persians. It wasn't going to be we're just going to come across here, capture a few cities, maybe plunder a few cities and go back. No, he was planning a very large campaign. But that's not in doubt. What is in doubt was how big was that campaign. And I think he would have taken over Asia Minor. I think he would have moved south like Alexander did, all the way down to Egypt. But would he have driven deep into Mesopotamia? Would he have gone into modern day Iran? Would he have gone all the way to India? And I don't think so. And I think this is the critical point, is that Alexander looked at Macedonia as just a province of his empire. A very important province. I'm not going to certainly limit reduce Macedonia's importance. But, when he got to Persia, he encouraged his officers and his men to marry Persian women. He wanted a hybrid empire. And the capital of that, of course, would be Babylon. So he looked at Macedonia as not the center of his empire, but just as a part of his empire. Now, would Philip have looked at that in the same manner? I don't think so. I think he might have even dealt with Darius. He might have even come to some agreement and allowed, maybe he would have allowed Darius to keep the empire past the Amanus Mountains, something like that. I mean, that's certainly a very distinct possibility. Okay, we'll move on quickly to Rome. So Rome also, got past the Second Punic War, my favorite part of the Roman history, but also the 2nd century is very interesting, what starts to happen to the Roman Republic. And by this time, of course, they've completely defeated Carthage, and about, they have some not bigger, but still some fairly sizable battles to fight in Greece. Greece is, of course, the next big one. These aren't easy fights, and they weren't. They got involved in several bloody battles there. It was not easy. Certainly Philip resisted, Philip V, who we're going to get to. But what becomes a problem slowly but surely as we move deeper into the 2nd century BC is that Rome has established this huge empire, all the way from Spain that moves into Greece. And the problem that they have is no longer like, give Rome an army and they will go defeat it. They knew how to do that better than anybody. You show them a city and an army and they'll go beat it. But how do you deal with something that's more psychological? How do you deal with class warfare? And that's where things began to destabilize, especially between during the time of Sulla and Marius. It would start civil wars that would almost bring an end to Rome. So we'll be getting to that hopefully sooner than later, because it's actually one of the more interesting time periods during Roman history for me is Sulla and Marius. I think that's a lot of changes. Even right before that with the Gracchus brothers. Things are changing very quickly with Rome. And so it'd be interesting to sort of talk about that. Okay, thanks as always for listening. And I hope I didn't bore you guys too much tonight with this sort of random talk, but just some random thoughts I had and thought I'd relay them. Thanks again.